And after 2 years, I was a member of the National Council on the issue of homeowners associations under the Cabinet of Ministers, because I realized that the legislation was not working. And our conference is called Living Life During and After. Every loss is unique, just as every experience is unique. That's why we initiated the conference, inviting people from all over the country. And if you make a mistake once, it's worth trying again.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. Today we have a special guest. I will say for myself that when I encounter this profession, I don't have much trust. But when I met Kateryna the first time I saw her, she somehow smiled at me. I thought, well, maybe I will change something in my personal life and try to trust. Thank you, Kateryna, for coming to us, and I will introduce you as a psychologist. I meant the psychological aspect of your life. Today we will talk about everything, about the war, about personal life, about what concerns us all. At the beginning, I would like you to tell us a little about yourself.
Lately, I am often introduced as a psychologist, although by education I am not a psychologist at all. I am a lawyer, an accountant, an auditor. I have a very long experience working specifically in these areas, but I have always been involved in public activities, and the first thing it started with, the child was 7 months old. I began installing heat meters in the Sokil residential area because we were heating the air. It was some year when Tymoshenko was in Moscow. We didn't have gas, but our boiler houses were burning gas limits so that they would be given gas again the next year. And this outraged me. And with a 7-month-old child, I went to persuade neighbors to install meters. This is how my public activism began. More than 80% of the meters in the Sokil residential area were installed despite the resistance of the housing maintenance offices. We were not allowed into the basements. They wouldn't let us install them, and I helped first in my building, then in the neighboring ones. At some point, I became the head of management in a neighboring building, also at the suggestion of a plumber who came and said, "Why are you just sitting at home? You have such experience. Go help people. Become a leader." My husband first asked me, "Why do you need this?" I said, "Well, I'm sitting at home, doing nothing. Here, I have a flexible schedule. I can take the child to kindergarten, to dance classes, wherever she wanted to go at that time." And my first working day started with all the elevators being flooded. I, without any experience, with my elderly ladies there, was mopping up water to the 7th floor from 6 in the morning until 12. That was my flexible schedule. When we had already stopped all the elevators, set everything needed, mopped up, the roof was leaking so much that everything was flooded up to the 7th floor. Then the time came. I thought, at least I'll run and feed the child, who is there with Grandma and Grandpa. It's a flexible schedule. I go out, and right before my eyes, a tree falls and completely blocks the road near the house. I call my husband and say, "Do you have a chainsaw there?" And we were sawing that tree until midnight to clear it from the road. The neighbors,
Come on, have you fed the child?
No, I didn't make it. And so, at first, I just started finding out how to get funds to help repair the roof. I came to the Cathedral Executive Committee, and they asked me, "Which housing construction cooperative?" I said, "This and that one. It's the most conflict-ridden in the area. Do you know what you needed?" But for almost 7 years, I did everything I could at that time. This was a very big experience. 3 months after I took charge of this building, I became the head of the district organization that united all the housing cooperatives and homeowners associations in the district. 3 months later, I became the co-chair of the city organization at that time. And 2 years later, I was a member of the National Council on Homeowners Associations under the Cabinet of Ministers, because I realized that the legislation was not working. And so until 2014, I was involved in reforming the housing and utilities sector. We were the initiators of many changes, battles with DTEC. There was even a time in the city council when I received calls, for example, from dormitories saying, "We were secretly told in the city council that if you don't help us establish relations with DTEC, no one else in the city will be able to." I gained a lot of experience over these years, and in 2014, when the war started, it became clear to me that I couldn't stand aside. Many of my friends joined Dnipro 1, and I volunteered until 2019 alongside Dnipro 1, helping. So my civic stance was somehow expressed in such actions. And psychology, which happened in my life, happened because I helped with social work with the families of the deceased all these years. Initially with Dnipro 1, then I communicated with other families, helped them find psychologists for children if needed. This is to enroll, ready, preparing children for enrollment. These were some joint trips. It was constant communication. To find doctors, someone needed to get into kindergarten and couldn't do it on their own because there were queues, for example. So we, as a volunteer group, would go and help with some bureaucratic decisions. This was work with our volunteers after injuries. We sent them for rehabilitation. And for me, it was about the memory of fallen friends and helping those who are fighting. Well, in the year 2022, it was not on a larger scale. And the psychological direction has always been alongside since the times of Maidan. We were very close with the Crisis Psychological Service, back then still in the city of Dnipro. They helped volunteers not to lose resources and did constant unloading. Back when we were at the regional state administration, once a week, psychologists from the crisis service would come to us and help us not lose our minds from what we saw, because I visited all the morgues that, for example, received the remains of our friends after Ilovaisk. And it was difficult. There was a time when I distanced myself from my family and barely communicated with my child. It seemed to me that I had to find all 31 of the deceased, and those who at that time spent time in Dnipro alone, they were missing. And I traveled, and each time it seemed to me that I missed something, overlooked something. And there was a time when I just stopped communicating with my other circle, with my godparents, with my parents. That is, I completely switched to being fixated only on this topic. And then friends came to visit me. With my persistent ability, I managed to get all the photos of the remains from all the prosecutors. And coming home, I also reviewed these photos. What if I missed some elements when I looked? And at some point, my friends came over, and while I dozed off, they password protected those folders for me. When I woke up, they said that if I needed it, they would tell me the password. But for now, I needed to stop. At some point, I promised myself that I would find our last comrade, Vova. And after that, I will simply stop dealing with this topic, well, so deeply. But I never refused when asked for some help. But I stopped going to morgues. I also worked with a psychologist to return to my family and not traumatize everyone around. And, well, it happened that the psychological direction was not just interesting to me, but truly something that helped not only me, but also those who were nearby. And it's about trust, about the professionalism of these people, about the fact that they really do, well, a lot of things still. Well, only now have they started talking about psychology as a component of such resilience. Because if you take the year 2014, many psychologists,
What do you mean exactly?
as a specialization, as a community of psychologists who help, well, because,
About the topic of war?
yes, we never had a culture of turning to psychologists. And psychiatry, for example, was always punitive in the Soviet Union. And when you tell a soldier, maybe you should see a psychologist, well, something isn't going right in relationships with the family when you return. And there are also objective and subjective things, but there are things that can be worked on to restore these trusting relationships, for example, in marriage. It was like that in 2014, 2015, and 2019. Am I sick?
This is taboo.
And the culture of turning to psychologists really didn't exist. So for me, psychology is not only about help, it's also about education. It's about sometimes connecting a professional psychologist who knows how, with a person who doesn't know where to turn. But you see that she can be helped without pills and psychiatry, well, using internal resources, and somehow guided. It's not, well, before 2019, most psychologists were perceived as facilitators for some business processes.
Or we saw this somewhere in movies in America.
Yes, yes. Well, we didn't have such a culture, and the war revealed that we can help ourselves when we truly turn to a professional.
Oh, you said to a professional. Personally, why don't I really like this profession? I understand that it is very necessary. But my problem is that I reached out several times, and they were very bad specialists. I can't call them specialists. They are, well, let's call them charlatans. Uh, how can a person find professional support so that it's not some kind of fraud?
Well, first of all, I think you should ask what your education is, because
They had education.
besides education, there is also certification and professional development. This is worth paying attention to because, for example, today just having a basic education in psychology and practice in business projects is not enough to work with loss. The same goes for veterans and military topics. Well, a psychologist who has always worked, for example, in business or some office, ask about their experience. Who have you worked with? Do they collaborate with the Territorial Recruitment and Social Support Center? Which families have they worked with? From which units? It's quite difficult, I think. But you should start with what experience the psychologist has, and don't be shy to ask about it. A psychologist who has professional skills in a specific area will clearly say, "This is not my topic."
Well, you understand that a person can say, yes, I'm the best specialist. I have so many clients.
Yes, certificates. If you see, for example, that these are, let's say, well-known. As of today, for example, the most renowned trainer and teacher on the topic of loss is Larisa Rebic, who is a widow and a professional. She teaches at higher education institutions. She has a scientific degree in working with loss and a candidate degree in this field. And if you see that, for example, a psychologist has completed an advanced training course, and it is at least 6 months long, specifically after basic education in dealing with loss, because education today only has a few hours. Basic higher education, specifically in the field of loss. This is not enough. A person must understand, who is working, what physical states occur with a person. Directly chemical changes happen, what happens with the brain, what biologically occurs with a person in the process of grieving. So, if you see, for example, that there is a certificate, such and such, well, that's already a plus. These are recommendations. Definitely, who can recommend you?
Oh, recommendations. Can recommendations be made by some help centers? Because it's not just psychological, there's legal support, there's rehabilitation support. In general, if we take the overall system of Ukraine, well, using Dnipro as an example, who can you turn to?
Well, not for advertising purposes, but still. The public organization, Crisis Psychological Assistance of Dnipro and Dnipropetrovsk region, currently unites more than 100 volunteer psychologists who do not just work with war victims. I really like the internal policy of the organization. If the crisis psychologists have not undergone supervision, they will not be sent to people. That is, it is the training of the psychologists themselves, more experienced ones with less experienced ones, on working through certain cases. This is ongoing work with the psychologists themselves. This is the second year in a row they are receiving grants to support the psychologists themselves. These are gym memberships, because a burned-out psychologist cannot provide help. A person who lacks internal resources loses professionalism, so basic theoretical knowledge, that's all fine. But there must also be experience and self-improvement. If you come, a female psychologist or a male psychologist, most men are at the front, but we have a few men on the team who also help both the military and veterans. So if you see that a person is exhausted and not taking care of their psycho-emotional state, getting irritated somehow, then think about whether you really need to approach this person. And do not be afraid to change, to reach out again. But everyone still finds a psychologist, like a hairdresser, like a dentist, a specialist whom you will then visit for many years, perhaps through trial and error, but you will still find the person who will help you on this journey. And if you make a mistake once, it's worth trying again.
Our viewer, thank you for being with us. Watch us, be sure to subscribe, write a comment. For the best comment, contact us. And if you need psychological help, we will assist.
We are waiting.
And what if there is a person like me? A few tips. If a person doesn't want to reach out, but even if they are not ready to see a psychologist yet, what can they do for themselves initially?
Independently, at a minimum, find a few such simple practices. These could be breathing, drinking water, or some things that simply allow you to change your focus. If we find ourselves in a traumatic event, we need to find tools that allow us, even in stressful states, to shift our focus so that the brain simply stops producing those hormones that further immerse us in the stressful situation. In fact, the body has quite large resources to overcome this, but everyone just needs to find their own way. For example, fishing really relaxes me. When I watch the float, I disconnect from everything. So for me, this is my personal relaxation. As my psychologist says, doing resourceful actions, even having coffee somewhere beautiful, can be resourceful. And when we, for example, went through therapy after a loss, we had a group that I also attended, and once a week she would check what resourceful things we did for ourselves that week, and asked us to just send photos in the group chat. And some of us even with animals. For some it's fishing, for others it's nature, and for some just being among people in the city is also resourceful. So everyone finds their own way. Therefore, it's necessary to find such options that relax and help. Except for drugs and alcohol.
Understood. Thank you. And I have another question about this. You said that one should allow themselves something. Someone wants to go have coffee, someone else wants to go fishing. There's a trend now where people have started partying actively, dancing, going to concerts, and there are other people who say it's not the right time. Our guys are fighting there, and you're dancing. I always thought that some people need to have coffee and some need to dance. But I understand that there is a war in the country, and I can't allow myself to go party now. But honestly, yes, I sometimes attend concerts of my favorite band. How do you personally feel about it? And as a psychologist, is it normal during wartime? I understand it's a very strange question, but
It's not strange, actually.
we have two sides and they are constantly fighting with each other. This is in the comments there, in social media groups. And you understand, others say, but I want to. War. I have the right. We need to live now. And others say, no, you can't. You should be ashamed. You are so bad. There are guys dying there, and you are dancing on their graves. And I'm thinking, I'm sort of with them, and not with them. I'm like, damn, where am I?
Actually, this is also really a subjective opinion, and one can relate to it differently. When we talk about funds being spent on who knows what, of course, there will be the opinion that perhaps these funds could have been spent on the armed forces and on an additional drone that would save lives. And on the other hand, for me, for example, it was very telling. A child came for vacation, and we decided to go to the pool. She came with her friend from the dormitory, with whom she lives her student life, right? And we went to the pool, the three of us, and we look around. I'm there texting, lying on this, under the sunshade, and there are athletes around. And I text my friend, why aren't they all in the army? But then I looked closer, and it was a platoon commander who brought his soldiers, who just left the combat zone, the war, for a few days. And do they have the right to rest? For me, they do. That is. And when I looked closely at how they communicate, I clearly understood that they are military, not some athletes.
What if they weren't military?
Well, the question will always remain open. Are we, as all citizens of Ukraine, ready to defend our homes, our country? I think not. And this is shown by the work of the Military Recruitment Office and how people run away from them. Someone went voluntarily, they are ready, while someone else is running away, and somehow, well, it doesn't look quite dignified in the eyes of others. It's each person's choice, I think, to be who they are, and will they be of help to the military when they run like that during a battle? Will they really be useful there? It's a philosophical question, to which I think we won't find the right answer now, unfortunately. My child, for example, in 2022, when I asked, how about you go to relatives abroad? She said, no, I didn't see my mom in 14. I believe that now, if something hits somewhere and we all die together as a family, it's more right than me worrying about you somewhere else. At that time, she was 16, and she chose her path. To me, she is brave, and sometimes even braver. I was told, are you normal, Mom? Your 10-year-old child is going to the ATO. I say, I am a normal mom. I am raising a normal child who visits orphanages in the frontline zone and organizes with other volunteers holidays for children who see nothing but war. For me, it's normal, but for someone else it's not. Someone judged me, saying I was risking my child, but I trusted those volunteers and those military personnel whom I trusted. For me, it was normal, and she has been volunteering since she was 8 years old. For her, it's okay.
How exactly? Well, I understand you said that she does. Helps in organizing celebrations for children.
At that time, yes. Now she is also studying to be a psychologist and helps in a different way. And at 8 years old, they collected for the first time, well, then blankets at school. She initiated her peers to collect blankets for the military. They gathered, made vitamin mixes for the military, painted everything they saw, and sent it, signed, corresponded with the military. They transported and collected some initial funds from their pocket money, bought some sweets, and sent them. The first letters she wrote in her childhood, well, I still keep photos of these letters because I really cried and was proud of my child, that she is different and braver than many adults. She understood in 2014 what was happening. For the first time, she gathered when the so-called displaced people arrived. Yes, as people say, people from Crimea. It was a family with 3 children, and the mother was pregnant. Dasha gathered her toys and said, "It's more important for them because they already left their toys there." She was 8 years old, and she came to the regional administration with her grandmother and brought, where I was staying all the time. She brought toys and said, "Mom, you told me about that family. Give them these toys. They are still friends with those children. They all grew up, are already adults, studying in educational institutions. For her, it was normal."
Because she had a good example, the right one, which effective.
Therefore, yes, through our example, we show. So I look when some men run from the military recruitment office. Well, it's strange to me.
Well, maybe I'll speak for myself, honestly. Regarding the topic of the military recruitment office, you understand that there are guys who are really afraid.
I understand, that's okay too. But can't he help the front here?
Or maybe he is helping? Well, they don't ask if you are a volunteer or not.
In reality, most people ask. The only thing is, well, the situation. Situations vary. I think it's also a human factor. And in the military recruitment office and social support center, there can also be different people. For some, it's already a job, service after an injury, and they might perceive it differently. And for others, it's really the authority given to them, and there will also be imbalances. But the question is, when a person just hides in the bushes, well, like a man, and doesn't just go to find out, well, for example, my younger brother received a summons at a checkpoint, went, and it turned out that, well, he has a white card, and he arranged everything properly, but, well, he received a white card now, due to his health condition. So he was just registered before, but he didn't run away. So, the question for me is about behavior, right? You can do something here. And if it's really something useful for the front, well, people who help the front don't run away, don't hide in the bushes, don't create some chats where they are using some slang, they inform others. Well, that's a different movement. Actually, well, they are different. Those people who do something for victory understand that maybe they don't know how to fight, but they are doing something useful. Someone buys drones, someone else does something else. Well, such people don't run when they see a military recruitment officer. Well, from my experience, talking with many people.
In my experience, they run away.
Really?
Yes, I have a friend who, he is well off. He earns a lot. When the war started, he had a chance to leave. He stayed. He says, "I want to be in the country." He says, "I am not a soldier. I am very afraid of this. I will help." He is an IT specialist. He bought a lot of things and he says, "I am afraid to go. I am afraid. I will not update the data. I help, but I am afraid."
Well, I think this question should be addressed to our institutions, that for such people it is still necessary to create conditions, perhaps some other ones. But I am afraid that the time will come when both pensioners and women will leave, or we will just lose the country.
Well, this topic is coming up now. Both generals and soldiers on the front line, and my friends say,
Because those who are there are already so tired. Well, I have a friend, the comrade of my deceased husband, and a man who served in 2014 in the 25th Brigade. Then he was discharged for health reasons and returned to civilian life. And in 2022, when it all started, on the 24th of February, He didn't go because he had a pregnant woman he was living with. He said, "No, this time I need to get married first." On the 23rd they got married, and on the 24th, the 25th, they got married. On the 26th, he returned to the unit and was mobilized. He didn't see his wife during her pregnancy. He came for the first time when he was given a week off after the birth of his daughter. The second time he came on leave, the child was 1 year old. He saw the child, and he always tells me, "I love my child immensely, but I don't know how to communicate with her at all. I didn't experience her first year, and I don't understand what it will be like when I come back." For him, there is only black and white. He doesn't have any bright colors in his life, and he sees the enemy is there, and behind are his own. And when he comes on leave, he says, "I am afraid of my child." And today he is still at the front, there in the Kursk region. And such people need to be changed, those who simply have not seen their families. And if we do not do this, there will simply be no one to protect us. And then on the scales, it will not be negotiations, but simply the loss of the country. Because, well, he will not stop, and we all understand this. And then neither business nor those who, well, it won't matter whether we were afraid or not. In 2022, we weren't afraid to make Molotov cocktails en masse, and everyone, I think, from their balcony was ready, if they entered Dnipro, to throw.
Ready in 20 seconds. Today is the 24th.
But today could be worse than the 22nd. Will we be ready?
I think, unfortunately, we are not ready now,
Yes.
both mentally and physically.
When in 2014 we all talked about there being a full-scale 14, 15. Well, the volunteer community clearly understood that it would be so.
As I remember, on the 14th, our employee from the Ukrainian Society of the Blind in the city of Rovenki, Luhansk region, came to us. I remember, in the summer. No, not in the summer. This was after Ilovaisk. This is the end of August, maybe the beginning of September. He arrived, and I remember, I was still so inexperienced. I still had KVN, still playing. Yes, and there were girls, parties. And we somehow talk with him. He says, "There will be a war." I'm like, "What war?" He says, "There will be a war." It's like flashbacks. Will there be a war? I say, "There won't be." He says, "There will be a war. He will go all over Ukraine." I'm like, "Well, okay." And now I understand that everything is getting worse and worse.
My godmother is remembering now. We hadn't talked about this topic for almost 10 years, and after I went through my loss, she somehow reappeared in my life, supporting me. And we started talking and recalling the year 2014. And why did we stop communicating? And she says, "Do you remember you said there would be a war, and we need to prepare, both girls and boys, and go to the training ground? And we told you that you were inadequate, abnormal." I say, "Yes, I remember." It was because of such things that we stopped communicating, because you didn't want to understand. And for me, it was about human life and the losses that I realized in 2014. And now I also remember that when we talked out loud about the full-scale war, well, people laughed at us saying, "Oh no, never." Well, what are you talking about? If you overlay the map. In 2012, when Ukraine signed an agreement with Shell for shale gas extraction, the birthplace of these treasures, yes, natural ones, is Luhansk, Donetsk, the Crimean Shelf, and Zakarpattia. In Zakarpattia, they couldn't destabilize it, but still, the so-called ATO, it was clearly for. In the year 2012, for the first time, my dad was in the military with a very analytical mind. And he was just talking about how, and he served during the times of the Soviet Union and finished serving in Russia, And from 1991 to 1997, the entire Russian army was preparing to attack Ukraine since those times. But the realization for him also came around 2012, when we had already lived there for about a century here, at home, returned, and he clearly told me that this preparation existed since the very collapse of the Union. And in 2012, when Ukraine signed the agreement with Shell, I was also driving with a colleague in the car, and we heard on the radio that Ukraine had already signed this agreement. It was not as political as it was economic and about energy independence for the country, because it allowed not to buy gas from Russia in such volumes at that time. And at that time, we were just driving in the car around the region, here, by the Homeowners Association with Rights. And at that time I said, "This is the beginning of the war." And he tells me, "No, we are so tolerant. Well, never. What are you talking about?" No. I say, "This is the beginning of the war." And he still reminds me of it today, that the war was about economic indicators. At some point, it was not exactly provoked. It just had the basis to go further for him. Everything that happened before the times of Maidan was more of an economic and cultural takeover of the country. In all spheres, they simply placed their people who influenced various public decisions, and so on. But here, Ukraine somehow started to resist. And at some point I clearly realized that I needed to prepare, and the girls with manicures at the Dnipro 1 training ground, who after Maidan were counting bullet shells to submit them back, because there was distrust between the volunteers and the police.
I remember those wonderful, solid times.
Yes, we crawled so that God forbid they wouldn't shoot us, but we would shoot them. And then these guys started fighting side by side. Well, except for those who ran to Crimea. But I recall my emotional state, and also the work of psychologists, by the way, who helped bridge this gap, including in combat units, into a format of trust, because it is impossible to fight in one unit without trust.
So every unit now has a psychologist, right?
Now they are, but back then there were volunteers, including the Crisis Psychological Service of Dnipro and Dnipropetrovsk region. Even Kateryna Chyzhyk went on requests from commanders. When people were afraid to go into battle, she worked with them on their fears and many other things.
How did you get the fighters to talk? I'm sorry, I'm not that official with you. Excuse me. So you said that many fighters said they didn't need psychological help.
Initially, they did not accept it.
How did you set up the communication? They were like, "That's it, we give up. Come on, girls, let's talk."
I think it's because of certain actions initially with family support, then certain things. Well, today Kateryna Chyzhyk can be called by the soldiers at any time of the day.
Could you a little... Is this Kateryna Chyzhyk?
This is the head of a crisis psychological service. She has 26 years of educational experience. She teaches psychology and has been directly involved in military topics and working with units, including the Territorial Center of Complectation, for 10 years. From now on, Titans UA is introducing a new topic: training psychologists to work with veterans. This is our separate program that we are just launching, and we will help social workers and psychologists in communities understand what is happening with veterans in order not to cause harm. To properly start these dialogues, and in the units, I also know more from conversations and stories from the veterans themselves. Trust is built over time, through certain professional actions and conversations. What happens stays behind closed doors where they communicate, and it is not shared with anyone, and the requests can be very different. For example, directly with the Titans UA, before starting the program, we don't want this to be something imposed by us. Before drafting the program for them, we first gathered them all, about 10 people, invited them to us, and conducted an internal survey on what topics and what they would like. And it seemed obvious to us that the topic of family relationships was important to them, but it turned out that, according to their requests, they have more or less adapted, and it's more of an individual work. They wouldn't want to discuss and work on it in a group. So we tailored the program directly to their request. Similarly, in the units, Ms. Tetyana, first, when they go somewhere closer to the front line, they are not allowed directly to the front line now, but during the ATO times, for example, they were at the front line, under fire, and there were various situations, and they risked their lives, unfortunately. This is also an element that today is not scientifically substantiated or described in any way. Sometimes foreign donors ask me, for example, what is the nonsense in this? Why do people risk their lives to save a dog somewhere? Why do they evacuate animals, for example? I say, how can you not evacuate an animal? It is also alive, and it cannot take care of itself, unlike a human. Well, that's risking life. They can't risk their lives. Human life is the greatest value. Well, it's not clear to them. Similarly, among volunteer psychologists, sometimes it was necessary to stop them so they wouldn't take risks, but could do more and convince them to do it this way, not that way, to make it more productive for those they are helping. This is also an element of motivation for these people. But the number of people who have worked for free all these years, for both the military and their families, he was inexperienced in 2014, but today it is such experience that scientific institutions around the world are interested in, and they would like to reconsider. That's why we initiated the conference, to which we invite people from all over the country and would like to.
All right, I see. Let's start. So let's talk about the conference, because I know that this is a very important event for you.
For us, this is the first experience of this kind for Dnipro. In Dnipro, unlike in Lviv and Kiev, such large-scale events generally do not occur.
Do you know why? I do. Because in Dnipro, as someone from the military said, Dnipro is a fortress. They are constantly engaged in war. They never have time for nonsense. I remember this phrase. And when they tell me, you have nothing in Dnipro, I say, yes, we have nothing because we are all volunteering. You have the opportunity there, in Odessa, in Kiev, in Lviv, to do something. We cannot yet, because we are focused only on the direction of the war, on helping displaced people, volunteers, and families.
And our conference, its name is Living Life During and After. So we talk about how we live during the war and how we plan for after. This is the focus we would like, particularly the psychological aspect, to draw attention to. And the conference itself is mostly for practicing psychologists to maximally showcase the practices that already exist and that help. This is a scientific practical conference. We want researchers who currently have research resources to work on and present existing studies on the topic of war. Because we cannot live the same moment again, and the emotions we are experiencing now, if not described as a scientific matter for others who do not experience such a war for decades in the world, then these scientific studies will be uninteresting if we conduct them after the war. That is, what happens to a person as a scientific action is interesting precisely at the moment when the person is experiencing it, because talking about an emotion that I experienced 3 years later, for example, about this emotion, well, You won't remember exactly what happened to the person, and the assessment of their state is interesting right now. Even when we talk about some practical things we do, for example, camps for therapeutic camps for families with loss, we never finish our work, psychological work, as a team of psychologists, mostly not me, the team of psychologists, when the camp ends. There is ongoing support, at least for a year, for these families, and the psychologist constantly analyzes with the group and the group dynamics what is happening with the families who has experienced a decline. Because the therapeutic camp itself gives a wow effect, they all come out, mostly, well, almost 100%, give feedback that they will look for a different meaning in life after the loss. Mostly they make, for example, wives make themselves little bracelets or some notes, and you can track it here and now on Facebook. The focus is on what I feel and what I do today, with the memory of my beloved husband, and the opportunity to carry this memory forward. But I focus on myself and my feelings after the camp. But for some, certain events in life trigger them again, and a person can be pushed back into that emotional pit, refusing to live again, or living at the cemetery, or something else. And this requires professional support for at least another year. And a year later, for example, this summer, we gathered with the girls we went with last year to such a therapeutic camp. And for ourselves, this is more about science. Yes, I would like this to be researched. Firstly, it's the formation of communities with these groups of girls who already support each other in any life events. They travel across the country with each other somewhere, even preparing for memorial events differently. For them, it's a cemetery. They invite each other to anniversaries or dates shared with their husbands. They no longer just go together, they go as support. That is, this is already another level of such emotional support, when, well, you wouldn't let a stranger in, but they start not just being friends with each other, but they really participate in life. That is, this communication, first of all, has a safe zone, a comfortable zone of communication. The same as me. She really understands what is happening with me, and I am not ashamed to say, for example in a group chat, or to call and say, I am not okay today. I can't handle such emotions. I was triggered. For example, after the loss, I never thought, having experience working with housing and communal services, yes, I never thought that a message from Dnipro reminding me to submit meter readings would trigger me. And at some point, I just started crying because I realized that my husband had been submitting the meter readings by himself for the last 8 years, and I don't even know how to access that personal account. And it was such a trigger for me. And I also write to the girls, this happened to me today. I don't know what to do with this. I put it off for later because I can't remember the password. I can't find the strength in myself to deal with such a simple thing, and it triggers me every month. But now we have already done it, well, it's also the environment that helps, that becomes. First of all, I know for sure that I won't be judged for this. In this environment. This is one thing because no one will understand it like they do. Secondly, I was immediately offered several solutions. Let's register a new office. We'll come over there to help. And what do you need for this?
That's for sure.
Yes.
But what if it's not there?
And for this, there are exactly such groups. Such an environment is exactly formed by those who have gone through such a path. And in his, I also didn't have the experience of loss at first, and for me, despite the fact that I have been in the field of grief and grieving for 10 years, I understood what happens with families. Every loss is unique, every experience is unique. And finding your own path, I never thought, and I once used it myself, that the word hang in there could be such a trigger. It's just trash. There's no one to hold on to, and you only realize this when you've lost someone, that this word, well, it's wild. But in our culture, it's a form of support from those around us.
Oh, can you give a few examples? Because we come across situations, well, personally in my circle, where I sometimes work with women who have lost their husbands. I know a little about how to do it correctly. Can you give some advice on communication culture? What can you say or ask at the beginning? And what should you never do? Well, some kind of top list.
From my experience, I would say it was very, well, firstly, my story also had its peculiar character because I was in the same car accident where my husband died. After the hospital, I had to learn to walk, eat, and talk all over again. And for me, even things like replacing a light bulb in the apartment were supportive. Things I could no longer physically do myself. Simple things. For example, my comrade tried to send me money every month as aid. Mishan's comrade, my husband's, whom I told you about, hasn't seen his child. And every month he tried to support me financially. All this money went to endless volunteer funds because it was important to me. And at that time, I was, well, helping. And I still help my husband's unit. And for me, it's like continuing his memory. And I constantly lived and live by this, and this is my contribution to victory, because there are other things I, perhaps, cannot do there. I cannot travel. I have, well, my own physical issues that I need to pay attention to. And the question for me was about support, well, emotional support. My Kita came to me from Donetsk after the hospital, when I first went out into the yard, well, outside after treatment. And he says to me, "How are you?" I say, "Not okay." I cried. I talked about how much I love my husband. He listened and listened. About a person who is no longer there, it is really difficult for those nearby, because we do not know how to react to this. We truly do not understand what can happen, and it will depend on many factors, including what the relationships between these people were. For someone, it's, well, painful. But there, no one can measure the level. That is, it's a unique phenomenon of measurement, right? It is impossible to measure how much someone is in pain. This is exactly psychology. It cannot perform an ultrasound of the brain and understand what is needed and how to help. Therefore, it is a constant search for some tools. And at some point, Fedya, who was sending me money, just sent a message. "I sent you 3,000 hryvnias, but I really ask you not to spend it on volunteering, but to take a friend and go have some coffee somewhere." And he just sent me this whole message. So I paused and thought, actually, I don't go anywhere. I mean, I'm not okay with it. And am I entitled to, am I betraying the memory? And these are, well, thoughts that just swirl in my head. And you wonder if you have the right to enjoy some fun things, or if you should to the front line. Only to the front line. He called back and said, "I am really asking you to just go for a coffee. There's nothing to it. Just drink it and think about how it tastes." And my friend and I went, had coffee, took a taxi, arrived at this cafe in style. A beautiful place. And at that moment, I realized just how important these things are, which you might not allow yourself. I mean, some people might in everyday life. Sometimes you just stop preparing something for yourself, and your basic physical needs are not met. I mean, you just stop caring so much that you don't do something. And sometimes you can receive from people who understand and want to support you. There was a friend who could just order me some dinner and send it by courier. She didn't have time to come. Well, maybe things like that. But she expressed her need to be close like that. And at first, you feel surprised, but then you call and talk with her for 2 hours. And you move from your not okay zone to a zone of, well, maybe someday it will be okay, but for now, it is what it is. And she's talking to you, and you realize that you've already finished this delivery food because you're just talking, and she's asking, so does it taste good at least? Have you tried something? Anything? And that kind of help is okay too, because it's about people not being indifferent. It's about them maybe not understanding you, but they are there for you. And at some point, I turned around and realized that besides my mum, who is always there, besides my child, who is always in touch even though studying elsewhere, besides those close ones who lived with me for the first months, really lived, I wasn't alone. There were those who were just worry about whether I am okay. And I realized that I am not alone, that I can go out among people. My Kita came a second time about Donetsk. He said, we are creating a volunteer institute now. I know you have experience, but you can take someone. Think about it. I said, well, I'm still in a corset. I can't handle a train. He says, get yourself a train ticket and go. You'll see the child and shift your attention. We worked on the project with Natalie Horoshko for 3 days, and that's how the idea of creating a psychological space to live through was born. That is, through my loss, through how I mourned, grieved and withdrew, someone appeared beside me whom I hadn't seen my Kita. Well, in 2022 we all saw each other because we started volunteering together, but before that, I hadn't seen him for several years at all. And he just came to visit me as a person and took me to this volunteer institute, which professionally turned everything I did before upside down. And our project was so large scale, and actually, according to our calculations that we did there and in the project, the opening of this space was supposed to happen in September 2024, but we opened on April 19th, 2024. And this is also about support, about the fact that there is trust in us, about the fact that sometimes a window of opportunity opens through such partnerships that you may not even expect. For me, the trust in me, psychologically and in our whole team, was very important because they supported me by pushing me forward and saying, go achieve, you can do it, you have such mega organizational abilities, which is why this year, in fact, in our organization, after 10 years, we finally wrote, thanks to the partnership with Save Peace in UA, we wrote development strategies. We dream about what, during the war, maybe you shouldn't dream about, but about development, like, for 3 to 5 years. I mean, we promote living here and now, but still want further development. And when we were about to open, it was quite interesting. We spent 2 weeks touching up, doing things, constantly cleaning, washing. We were all ready to open. And then we come 2 days before the opening, and we have already invited many guests. And the builders demolished, well, cut out another door, and everything we did there needs to be started from scratch. We cleaned it for a week, and now we have to do everything from zero. And I am showing the psychologists via video call that we have unforeseen issues here. We agreed that this would be done after the opening. Well, cutting these doors. The builders decided they had time, and as for us, they didn't care. And I show the team saying, we have an unforeseen situation here. And they laugh. They say, Katya, let's postpone the opening. My Kita called me, saying we're not ready, that we're not on time. Let's postpone for a week. or better yet, 2, until the furniture arrives, and other things. I said, no. All invited for the 19th. We will have the opening on the 19th. And so we opened. As of today, if we talk about some statistical things, actually, when we summarize the month there, both for donors and for ourselves to understand, we see that every day we have 3 to 5 events happening simultaneously, some individual, group, some consultations. But when we counted how many people that was, in the first 5 months, it was 1,515 people who sought psychological help. For us, it's not just about professionalism, it's about people's trust in psychologists in general. And when we see that they return, it indicates that they feel comfortable working with us, that they see the difference between how they came and how they continue. Something is happening, and the number of events we have is constantly increasing. In September of the year 2024, it struck us that we need to expand, and the strategic plan is just what helps us. And today, we are also grateful to the donors who are already coming. They say, "We know you do great and a lot. Let's do something together." And this is also a reputational thing that initially spread by word of mouth. The first project, we didn't sleep, didn't eat, lived all together at the Chizhik headquarters, in my apartment, constantly with the whole team. We were just writing, doing things. We had 7 internal strategic sessions to even start the project lived. And each of us in the team has either lost someone or is waiting for someone. Well, we understand what is happening. And it is important for us that psychologists do not traumatize people, but are professional. Therefore, we constantly work on improving the qualifications of the psychological community. We look for more experienced trainers and teachers who can share practical skills. We partner with all organizations that are known for quality and have a good reputation for experience. We try to be as open as possible. Therefore, one of the areas we are currently exploring is co-working for psychologists. And those psychologists who have some recommendations can come and conduct some events with us for free additionally. That is, apart from our psychologists in the region and city, we are open to psychologists who are ready to partner and gather around professional help. Therefore, the conference we are now introducing is mostly to show this direction to scientists, which is happening among practitioners, and to show practitioners that beyond practice, there is something else that also needs to be implemented. And sometimes, when you are running in your various authors programs, we have a lot of psychological authors programs that have proven to be very high quality. You need to stop and still pay attention to what is happening with a person and describe it. This is something we are not good at. I think that both the war and those affected by the war today are of interest to all countries in the world in this regard, including today and after the war. Because this obsessive term, PTSD, like all the military will come back and have PTSD, has no scientific basis. It's just such a...
Only among the military. Now it's trendy. I have PTSD, I have OCD, I have something, and you're like, what kind of abbreviation is that? Guys, get a grip, everything's fine.
Yes. And in fact, no one has ever conducted any research on this matter. And is it really? And if we talk about PTSD, it is actually a diagnosis. So, it's not just that I put this label on myself and go around telling everyone. These are methods, studies that need to be conducted. We, for example, conducted such studies after Ilovaisk, and it turned out that PTSD indicators, that is, the PTSD coefficient in wives who were waiting for their husbands from Ilovaisk, was much higher and more prone to some disorders, well, the closest. And for the men who went through Ilovaisk, this indicator was much lower. And when we started to find out why this happened, firstly, it's gender. Well, the female imagination, it fills in pictures and fear when the husband is out of contact. It fills in such things that it simply destabilizes a person's emotional state to the point where she can wind herself up to these levels. And those volunteers who came from Ilovaisk and underwent such studies, it turned out that it was frightening for them. For them, this was also a new experience because it was, well, the combat actions in Ilovaisk were radically different from those that were there before. This was work with the loss of comrades, which they paid attention to. But overall, it was clear to them too, enemies ahead, their own behind. And this side-by-side and understanding of what is happening, that is, I am in the most stressful situation, inside, but I do not embellish. That is, I react based on the facts of what is happening around me. And the psyche worked in such a way that these indicators, according to all studies, turned out to be much lower than those of their wives. So for me, when someone starts talking about something like, well, I have PTSD, I just want to ask, how did you measure it? Well, how?
That's why you need to turn to psychologists and professionals like you.
I am not a psychologist.
All right, all right.
To the team, yes. I am truly proud of our professional psychologists because sometimes we are afraid to reach out to someone. It's like going to the doctor. We don't like going to the doctor.
At the last moment.
Yes, that's when it's really extreme. But now I would just advise people to follow our resources. There are things like, for example, once every 2 weeks, or once every 3 weeks, we just make board games for volunteers, for example. This is also a relief that allows you to communicate in a circle you trust, meaning like-minded people, yes, and relax together. It helps to shift the focus of attention from what you are constantly doing. As my dad used to say, when you engage in physical activity, you need to rest with something mental. If you do something for the mind, you need to go work physically. It's the same here. Our open events for everyone can be tracked on our resources, and you can just come to the open groups. When we gather now, it's not only for relief. Sometimes there is first psychological aid if you witness someone in a state of shock. How to react. And this is also taught. This is about enlightenment, so-called psychoeducation, to use the correct terminology. This can be learned too. We are currently holding a lot of open events. Keep track of them. Come over. We are always open for a drink, a cup.
A cup of tea.
But even our Olena Shilova, who is our leading psychologist on loss, she introduced for us such a thing. We made ourselves cups, called God, Resourceful Coffee, and we pour it, always recalling some positive things for ourselves. So come, we'll pour you a little cup.
Thank you. Definitely. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for what you do, and you are a very pleasant person. Well, one should reach out, even though you say you're not a psychologist, but I feel a psychological vibe.
Really?
Yes, there is something.
Well, I think it's experience and volunteering, and just a kind of human empathy that is simply inherent in the person, most likely. Well, and experience working with such families. I think we'll get to the point where I'll go and get a third education.
You need it.
Because I see this as my mission here and now.
If it calls to you and your soul needs it, you should do it.
Thank you.
Everything will be fine. Thank you.
Likewise.